Hello, Met Police.
Hello, police. What's the emergency?
Police, what's the emergency?
Well, please, what's your emergency?
Yeah, listen, I'm at KFC Chicken, yeah, in Harlesden.
Yeah.
And I placed an order for £13.
Yeah.
And they're not giving me my food.
I'm sure we can all agree on this one. That ain't an emergency, no matter how hungry you are. But the reality is that police get hundreds of calls like this every single day. And it's a problem that's getting worse. Only a small fraction of 999 calls are for genuine emergencies.
Hello, Met Police.
I've got a new car. It's the first time I've charged it. I cannot remove the charging lead from the car. How do I do it, please?
Come through to the police. You need to speak to the car dealer. You've come through to the police.
I know what I've come to because it's urgent for me. I can't drive the car.
You need to speak to the car dealer.
Okay, on the face of it, they might seem amusing, but there is a serious side to this. They're putting a huge strain on the emergency services. In this episode, we explain what really happens when you call 999. Who answers? What do they do? How do those first few seconds shape everything that follows? And how do the police respond on the front line? Welcome to the Crime Agents. Welcome back to the show with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Basu.
Well, here we go, Neil. 999 calls, something you know a lot about, of course. The numbers on this are staggering, actually. So I'm just looking into this. Just the Met alone, 2.2 million calls. Guess how many of those are actually genuine emergencies?
I don't have to because you wrote it down for me.
Very good.
Yeah, but I think it's 15%.
Oh, do you know what? Correct. I tell you
Oh,
what,
oh.
you're good, you. You're good.
Oh, it's a detective one.
But I mean, just thinking about this, and we're going to hear a few examples later. I mean, this must be one of the most frustrating jobs.
I mean, I like your opening. I mean, getting in the way of me and food is pretty much an emergency in my household, but it's not one for the police. And put it like this, I'll do almost anything to get away from a spider, but I'm not going to call the boys in blue. And you can imagine how frustrating this is. I mean, there was a report years ago that said the police only actually deal with about 20% of crime. 20% of the workload that police officers do when they're actually working is crime. And then if you think only 15% are actually worth the 999 call in the first place, we are bleeding our thin blue line. We're stretching it so thin by these calls. They get incredibly frustrated because they know somebody is suffering. Somebody is not getting through. They're not being able to get to the calls that really count. And these people don't seem to care. No.
I mean, as if there's not enough for them to focus on other than some of these calls. I mean, some of the examples, delivery drivers not turning up, car breaking down, their dog not coming back in. Well, I'm a dog owner, so just give them a few treats, they'll be straight back in. Well, Neil, I've got a few more examples for you. Have a listen to these.
Well, please, what's your emergency?
There is a big spider in my hallway, and I can't do anything. I feel very scared.
Is this a joke?
No, it is not.
You've called police about a spider.
Spiders. Discuss.
I'd rather not.
Have you ever responded to a call where?
No, I've never responded to a spider.
No.
I've had colleagues respond to what was thought to be a snake.
Yeah. Okay.
You know when people were keeping exotic pets?
Yeah,
It kind of started in the 90s. So we've had a snake, and we used to have lots of dogs in the mid-90s because of the Dangerous Dogs Act.
Yeah.
You know, our favourite friend Scooby running after the dog.
Well,
with a
we have to tell that story
Yeah,
later. If you think about, I mean, there is a real serious issue here. We're having a bit of a chuckle about it, and I'm sure a lot of you out there will be chuckling too. But there is a really serious side to it because someone right now is calling 999 and they're struggling to get through because of the volume of calls, which are frankly nonsense. We've just heard a few examples there. You could hear it in one of the call handlers' voices, how annoyed and angry they were when someone's talking about, not able to start their car. He's saying, you called the police. What are you calling us for? I mean, it must be absolute maddening for them.
Yeah, and I guess that call handler, that was barely restrained fury.
Yeah, wasn't it? Yeah.
I could understand it.
I think it was excusable.
And not the first time that day that would have happened to him. And I remember Sir Peter Fahey, when he was Chief Constable of Greater Manchester, so that must be over 10 years ago now, he, just before he retired, he released a similar sort of montage of this is the crazy stuff that's coming into my control room. It's clearly not had an effect. I mean, I think the latest HMI CFRS, Her Majesty's Inspectorate, their State of the Nation, their State of Policing report last year talked about something like 14.8 million incidents are reported to the police every year. That gives you some idea of the volume, the stretch. Then not every police force has the right technology to cope with a flood of calls. They're not all telephone calls. That's all incidents coming into the police. But so you can imagine, that overwhelming you and overwhelming your switchboard and overwhelming your operators. They've got this, it's not mandatory, it's not in law, but they've got a policy that basically says every single one of those 999 calls has to be answered within 10 seconds.
Really?
Yeah, it's got better over the last few
I was going
years.
to say, how often does that actually happen?
Well, I think the Met have just reported they were up to 91%, which is
That's
the best in a very long time.
I mean, considering a lot of them are nonsense.
And and that's the trouble.
Yeah.
When they're under such pressure to answer those calls so quickly, and they've improved their technology to be able to do that, and you've got forces all over the country that have variable. Some of them are doing much better than others, but I think generally speaking, HMI are saying it's getting better. So if you, and let's be honest, this is proper trust and confidence for a chief constable. If you cannot answer 999 calls, you're finished as a chief.
Yeah.
It's probably the number one proxy for how good the police force is whether an operator picks up the phone and then deals with you well when they pick up the phone.
And talk me through the process. So someone calls 999. What happens next?
Well, again, there's another College of Policing national policy. I mean, all these things are designed to make it consistent across the UK. So wherever you are, whether you're up in Geordieland or you're down here in London, when you ring 999, you should get a similar kind of response.
Right.
And the idea is there'll be some kind of triage of your call. So the probably as frustrating as that poor call handler we've just heard.
Yeah.
But they're going through a thing they call the Thrive model. That's an acronym. We love acronyms in policing.
You do.
First threat. Is there a current threat to the person who's calling in? Not really with any of the examples. Is somebody suffering harm as we speak? What is the risk to the person who's calling in? Is there any chance of investigating this? Is this a solvable crime? What is the vulnerability of the person who's just called in? And clearly that vulnerability, I'll get back to the vulnerability bit. And the last one is engagement, E for engagement. And that is there another partner that could deal with this better? The NHS, social services,
Fire service. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, is this one for police or not?
Yeah.
They go through that. They're supposed to go through that very quickly and make a determination. And I think some of the problems that have come in the past is when you teach somebody, steps 1 to 5 in an acronym and you're going through that, it sounds very stilted. It sounds, you can lack a bit of passion, you can lack a bit of compassion to do that. But some of it is incredibly subjective. What's a threat to you might not be a threat to the call handler, and particularly on the vulnerability index.
Yeah.
What you might think is ridiculous to be vulnerable about, fear of spiders notwithstanding, might not be very serious to the call handler. And if they get that wrong, they get the classification of the call wrong, and then it goes to dispatch. So we've just talked about that's call handling and receipt when you ring 999. If they grade that call, they'll grade it from 1 to 5, 1 being an emergency response, 5 is I've finished with this call. A bit like our call, but I'm ending the call.
Yeah.
And if it's an emergency response, police officers have to be deployed within 15 minutes. That's the life-threatening stuff.
Yeah.
And of course,
15 minutes sounds quite long, actually.
Well, it
Am I
sounds
being harsh?
you're being quite harsh
Am
because
I?
if you think about,
Well, if it's life or death, 15 minutes, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a long time.
I know, but think how many police officers are actually on duty. You and I have some experience here.
Yeah.
We're not going to go into numbers, but I think the public might be slightly shocked about how stretched that thin blue line is.
Indeed.
So unless you've got your officers literally waiting round the corner, 15 minutes is not an unreasonable trial. Anyone who's living in this city, I think the average speed in this city, if you haven't got blue lights and two tones, is 8 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So think about how far away your local police is, how many stations have been shut down, where the police officers are actually deploying from. And any good chief constable will be looking at patterns of crime in their force area and trying to make sure that their response teams are somewhere close to the epicenters of crime.
Yeah.
Where they're getting most calls from.
I
But 15 minutes, I think, is reasonable
Yeah,
if you make it.
I'm just thinking of the recent examples we've seen just in the past few weeks. So look at the Manchester synagogue attack, which was escalated to Plato, which means a marauding terror attack. And then you look at the Huntingdon.
And that was an 8-minute response to actually finish the entire
Finish it, yeah, but they were on the scene in 3 minutes.
Yeah, which is remarkable.
Which is mental. And then Huntingdon, the suspect was in custody within 8 minutes.
Yes.
Of that
Oh,
one.
that's-
So maybe I'm just, maybe we've been spoiled by response times recently. And
Well-
that's why I'm thinking 15 minutes
Yeah.
sounds a long time.
15 minutes is the average, so it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it's going to take, but they are trying to hit every single 999 call that gets graded as a priority 1 response within 15 minutes. So, for instance, you could hit, this used to happen to us all the time. When I was a commander in southeast London, my borough commanders were getting castigated because they'd get one call that they just ran out of police officers. So effectively that call might take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, half an hour, an hour. And that call, despite the fact that 99 of the other 100 calls were answered within the time limit, that one skewed their average and put it out. And they were being beaten for that. And it was literally one call.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of look at the average, look at the mean and say, I think that's stretching enough. Answering a telephone call within 10 seconds and getting a cop to the scene within 15 minutes for a life or death call, I think is reasonable if we could get to that standard across the country all of the time. I'm told it's improving.
We talk about control rooms. The initial people on the phone that you speak to, they're not actually police officers, they're civilians, of course, but they're highly trained and, they go through this every day. And then there's the other side of it. When it actually gets through to the police, that will be then dealt by police officers. But I have been in the pod, which is the place where the armed police, it's kind of their own specific call centre where anything that could potentially be a firearms call, such as a marauding attack or any serious weapons like a hammer or a knife or a machete, mainly a gun, they will be the ones who decide if the firearms police then respond. And actually, last time I was in there about a year ago, just seeing the work that they do. And technology is kind of playing a big part now, because I remember one person rang up and there was a guy with a machete kind of going up and down the street threatening people. And someone called the police. It went through to the pod, the firearms control room, and then they sent them a link into their phone, which allowed the caller to then click on a link, and then the pod could actually see what the person on the street was saying.
That's fantastic.
It was unbelievable, and that's then recorded. It can be used as evidence. I didn't even know this existed. But they were saying
To be honest, that's moved on since my time. I'm not aware of us ever doing that 4 years ago. So
yeah, no.
really
And so I was sat there behind the guy, and he was saying, point your camera over there, point your camera over there, and you could see this whole event unfolding. And it
I'm
just...
slightly worried we're putting that member of the public at risk there by
Well, no.
your unmovable CCTV camera.
They have to consent to it, of course, but and they talked them through it. He said, listen, would you mind? We've got no officers there right now. Would you mind just pointing your camera at it, and then we'll be able to see it if you click on this link. So technology is really catching up, and that allowed them to then assess, yes, this is definitely a firearms job. And then the firearms officers were there.
And that's quite important for our listeners who don't know enough about policing. And I've had lots of sort of feedback from police officers who listen to this podcast, which is fantastic. But for those who aren't, just reassuring to know that when you phone 999, it goes into... and it is a call centre. It's Central Communications Complex, CCC, and there are 3 of them in the Met. The Met's so huge. But that's that's the centre that takes the call. But then they are sending it to dispatch. And in a case where they've triaged that call using Thrive and they know it's life or death, and actually an armed response might be required because it's potentially a lethal response is required. And it goes into that pod you were sitting in. That pod has an inspector. So it has a tactical firearms commander who can assess.
Yeah.
It's a second check, a safety net, so that we don't deploy guns to incidents where guns are not required. So just to reassure listeners, there is a check there as well.
Yeah.
And that inspector will have to refer that decision. While the officers are running to the scene, it'll go to a strategic firearms commander who's also on duty 24/7, who's a superintendent. There's another check.
Yeah.
This is the professionalism of firearms in this country, which never gets talked about.
Yeah, exactly. And then also, I was really surprised by the amount of people around this kind of little unit they were sitting. And it looks like a movie where you see all these CCTV cameras, and as soon as a call comes in, they can just access the CCTV that is required and just see what's going on. And then dispatch their teams, and then, they all pile in. And then they've also got like intelligence officers who aren't really part of the decision that goes into how do we respond. So just say someone says there is someone who is well known, they give them a name, he's carrying a gun, This intelligence officer will then dig into detail about the specific person, and then that just informs the officers before they arrive at the scene who they might be dealing with. It's a pretty slick operation, I've got to say.
It's very good, but that it's not just available to the firearms pod. Within core policing, bear in mind that response policing is the most dangerous of any police officer's duty, because you have no idea what you're responding to or what you're going to find when you get there. But what you normally have is a route and an address. So you've got somebody sitting back in the control room who's got a chance to start interrogating systems on your behalf. Now, officers have access to those systems in the car. You've been in those cars.
Yeah.
You've been in those cars when blue lights and two tones are going off. You need somebody who's got a clear mind and is able to sort of deduce what intelligence is going to help the officers when they get to the scene, so they're not putting themselves immediately at risk or immediately in danger when they get there. It is such a, I think in some respects, underappreciated, undervalued specialism in policing response. All my colleagues out there who are detectives will go, "He never said that when he was a detective." And that's not true. I think any decent detective knows that the work of the response team makes the work of the detective easier if they do it well, but we all celebrate the fact that they are the bravest of us. I mean, quite often when we get there, they've calmed everything down and everything, we can start to think. They have milliseconds to think.
I think that's a good moment to break, and we're going to get into the job and the role of a response officer more just after this. Let's talk about response officers, Neil. It is probably one of the most unpredictable and thrilling jobs in policing. I've spent many, many hours in the back of a car or back of a van.
Not always in handcuffs.
None yet, thankfully. It's a remarkable job they have, and you just do not know what's around the corner, because it is literally their job to respond to these 999 calls we're talking about, or any other intelligence that comes in. And the thing that's extraordinary about them is they've got this remarkable ability to switch off, right? And then when they need to, just click into action. They could be talking about the football the night before or whatever it may be. But it's remarkable to witness, actually, these guys. And when I ask them about it, they say we need to switch off. I mean, we can't just be on high alert all the time, because we'd be exhausted after an hour. You must have, many years ago, been a response officer.
Yeah, all right. I've driven a desk for a while rather than a police car. But yeah, if you get to my age, Andy, you might be unfortunate enough to have an ECG at some point that will monitor your heart rate. And those funny spidery graphs that you go with ups and downs? That's what response policing is like.
Yeah.
It's sometimes described as fire brigade policing. People hang around just waiting for that call, and then suddenly the adrenaline goes and their pulse rate shoots through the roof. And then, as you say, when there isn't one of those calls coming in, they calm down and they're having a chat about the footy or what they, or Strictly or Traitors or whatever they were watching last night.
Yeah.
And that it's very difficult to maintain that kind of equilibrium. It can get very boring in the gaps between. Now, the best response officers are proper investigators in those gaps in between. If they have time, they'll know their area, they'll know the places to go and patrol, they'll know the hotspots, they'll be doing proactive policing, they'll be checking for burglars, they'll be checking for robbers, they'll be checking for people who are suspicious, and they'll be stopping them and speaking to them. But actually, it's got so busy. We talked about the number of calls. The last time I remember being in the back of a car with my team as they were going out was as a chief superintendent in Barnet, and they were literally responding to call after call after call after call.
Really?
So that downtime, chatting about the footy and Traitors, that had gone. They were literally going from 1999 call to
They
another.
must have been exhausted.
Well, they are exhausted. And I think that hyper alertness that you described, that's really dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, we did a survey at the charity I worked with, 2018, that showed a fifth of officers have PTSD, many of which have complex PTSD. One of the signs for that is hyper alertness. Well, it's hardly surprising that you spend your entire life waiting for the next incident to come through and not knowing what that will be.
Yeah.
It's not like you can control your in-tray.
Yeah. No, exactly. And other than just responding to these events, I mean, sometimes they just don't know. And they can find themselves in the most tragic circumstances or the most hilarious. I mean, I've been with them when they've responded to a stabbing in which a young kid died. That was horrific for them. And then on the other side of it, I remember one call I was with them and they got this call come in saying there was these two people having fight with machetes. So we were just around the corner. We screeched round And it was two drama students practicing for their play. You should have seen their faces when the police jumped out with their tasers. Please get down on the ground. Honestly, it was hilarious. So you have these kind of moments. So
It's sort of hilarious, but you kind of, you know that there's a movie studio within,
Yeah.
like a movie unit
Yeah.
within the Metropolitan Police. If you're going to do filming on the streets of London, you're
let them know.
supposed to let them know,
Yeah.
so you don't get tasered or shot.
Well, the thing was, it was straight after. I mean, they were just two kids. They didn't really know what they were up to. I mean, on the face of it, it looked ridiculous. And it was an elderly neighbour who reported it in, who thought it was genuine. But when they got there, the officers, you know, as I said, they nearly tased them because these kids, they froze and they didn't drop the weapons because they were so terrified to see these police running at them. And one of the coppers said to me, he said, they don't realise how close they were to
No,
getting tased.
they wouldn't.
And then, and
Can
then,
you imagine being the copper in the box having done that
God, yeah.
with the big retractable sword that just...
Oh, no. I know. So it's and no wonder this is an addictive job for people. And what you often find is with response officers, they then go on to more specialised response, such as armed response or counter-terrorism response
Or public order.
or
That's a very
public order.
popular-
And it really is. It is a speciality. There are officers who are brilliant at response, and there are officers who just aren't cut out for it. They're cut out for a different type of policing.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think it is where you, it is the foundation of everything you do.
Yeah. Would you say you need to go through that role as a police officer? Do you need to, at some point in your career, before you go on to, you know, if you want to be a murder detective, before you do that, do you think you need to be a response officer?
Yeah, I was asked...
This is the old Bobby's on the beat argument.
It's an old argument for a reason, because
Yeah.
that's what sustained us for 200 years. So
Sure.
I used to argue against the direct entry detective program. There's a very good reason I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But the reality being is, if you only have a few weeks in uniform experiencing that, it's going to make, I think it's going to be harder for you to appreciate what uniform do
Yeah.
and how important it is that they do what they do well
Right.
in order to help you solve the crime when you get there.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fundamental reason. And again, I feel you say it's an addictive job, but actually an awful lot of response officers are quite demoralised because they feel they get, you know, there was a saying in the Metropolitan Police, and certainly under Cress, it was, you know, you'll be well led, you'll be well equipped, and you'll be well supported. And they don't feel that. They feel that they get the worst kit, the worst equipment. That's not strictly true, but that's how they feel. And they don't feel that they're being well led because, you know, it isn't the same model I grew up with a sergeant to every 6 officers and an inspector you knew on your relief. And the call centre staff we've just discussed would be part of your team, and they would be sat in your police station and you'd know them really well. So they'd care about you when they were sending you to a call. And it was a very different atmosphere than today, where it feels a bit more sterile. And they're all anxious to get into a specialism. So they feel somehow that response is the lowest rung of the ladder in policing, which it shouldn't be. It should be a specialism in its own right,
Yeah.
just like public order or armed policing. But that they don't feel that.
Is it not seen though as a stepping stone to? So just say you want to become a firearms officer, for example. There's no way you can do that without being a good response officer, surely.
No, not unless you're already an accredited armed officer from another force, in which case you will have proven that at that force. So you're absolutely right. I mean, but I think it's the same for all policing, because don't forget response policing. I mean, it's in the name. You're responding to anything and everything.
Yeah.
You have the least time in which to calculate your decisions. Your decisions have to be spot on all of the time, not least because these days you're almost inevitably being filmed, edited, and stuck online when you're doing the job.
Yeah.
It's the most confrontational, so it's where you learn your courage and your ability to be authoritative. It's where you learn to make decisions about reasonable use of force. Almost everything that is imperative in policing to get right, you learn as a response officer. We should value them more. Because we don't, we end up with this kind of throughput where all the youngest and least experienced officers end up on the front line. Now, you cannot have... Any private business will tell you that you need your best people as close as possible to your clientele or customers. For us, that's either victims or suspects, but they are our customers. You need your best people as close to them as possible. It's odd that in policing we don't often do that. And it's not that our response officers aren't brilliant, but I will tell you now that the average length of service of a response officer in the United Kingdom at the moment is under 5 years.
Is it?
Yeah. So the majority of the teams are
know
the
that.
least experienced. It would be great if you could double them up. So with an experienced officer and a young officer together, there aren't enough people.
Well, that used to happen, of course. I mean, I remember speaking to one response officer who I'm friends with, and actually, ironically, given that stat you've just given me, he's just retired. He's just left the force to go and do something else. He's a bit sick of it. And he said when he first joined, like 10 years ago, he had, this skipper who's the sergeant, who was, a bit of a legend, very experienced, and he taught him the job. He's saying that this isn't really happening now just because, well, this is a problem we're seeing all over policing, of course. There doesn't seem to be that mentorship that there used to be in your day. Speaking of your day, come on, you must have a few stories about some responding.
2,000 years BC.
You said it.
Well, in response, I describe it as a job that is both sickening, exciting, and funny. And we've talked a little bit about that. I liked the story about the theatre play. I remember being the operator in a car. My friend Grant was driving, and we get called to man armed with a knife in the street.
Right.
There's a party that's a fight. It's spilled over into the street, and there's a man armed with a knife. So we blue lights and two-tones to this lovely suburban part of Battersea. It's a very nice place. The Nightingale Triangle, usually yummy mummies, prams, very posh houses and stuff. And you can hear this party from streets away as we're approaching.
Right.
And you can hear shouting and screaming. So you can imagine we're tense, that ECG is at the top. We pull into the street and you can see this guy standing in the middle of the road with the most enormous kitchen knife I've ever seen in my life. Grout hairs to for a moment I thought he was just going to run him down.
Right.
But he swung the car in a bit of a J-turn, leaving me literally opposite the guy with the knife, not even out of the car yet.
Oh, really?
I'm a probationer at this point. I open the car door and I literally have to push him away with the car door, jump out, and I scream at this kid, drop the fucking knife.
Yeah.
And he just looked at me completely terrified. All I could see was the knife.
Yeah.
And then he dropped it with a massive clang. I look up and I can see he's just a kid.
Yeah.
He's a kid. He must weigh half what I do.
Yeah. That's probably why.
And I turn round and Grout's literally crying with laughter, and he says, "Bash, you're a proper cop now."
Oh, really?
It was
that
just
your induction was.
Yeah, the induction was. I don't think he intended to put me in that. Put me quite so much on offer. But you can imagine the adrenaline. That graph going. You're going to that. It is hardly surprising that some cops who've got a couple of seconds to make a decision, end up using more force than you could possibly. That a reasonable person, when you're sitting in a court of law saying, "How did you react, officer?" and you say, "Well, I did X," and they go, "Well, that was unreasonable." If you're not there at the moment, you don't understand it. And then I've talked on this show before about the sickening, going to a car to a boy under a train, when you can hear the most experienced officer on the relief who's driving the area car, who's first on scene, is retching over the radio while he's trying to describe what he's seeing. I mean, I cannot describe to you. That was the longest. It must have taken us 10 or 12 minutes to get there. And it was the longest 10 or 12 minutes of my life, because you have no idea what you're about to see, what it's going to do to you. And that report I was talking about, the 2018 report, it talked about the single greatest trigger event for post-traumatic stress in cops is the exposure they get to sudden violent death, and no more so when it's a child. And that was nearly 33 years ago now. And if I close my eyes, I could describe it to you in intimate detail. It is a terrible thing. And of course, most people will never see anything like that in their entire lifetime, and cops are seeing that many, many, many times. So those trigger events are, and the last one I'll tell you, which is proves that sometimes we can't always get it right, was we used to have this lady who'd stand in Wandsworth on a roundabout, and she was from the local mental hospital called Springfield in Tooting. And she used to wander out. She used to escape, and effectively, she had these. Remember those old Sony Walkmans with a big orange?
Yeah.
So you could see her from a mile off because these huge sort of orange. And she'd be standing on top of the roundabout, singing her heart out. And God bless her, she was having the time of her life.
Yeah, I bet
she was in a good mood. She wasn't causing anyone any trouble. She was never in danger because she was never going to come off the roundabout. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't going to play.
The roundabout was her stage.
Yes. Well, exactly. Now, of course, what would happen is she'd be distracting drivers. So the most likely thing would be an accident. But of course, drivers started to abuse her as well. It was awful. And me and my relief always seemed to be on duty when she escaped. And one day I get the duty of finding her and returning her to Springfield.
Yeah.
So I put her in the car. She's singing away in the back. It's all very happy. It's like a Spotify playlist. And I get to Springfield Hospital, and I go into the entrance, and there's lots of patients wandering around. I finally see somebody in a nurse's uniform, and I take Joe over, this lady over there. Joe's not a real name. Take Joe over, sit her down with the nurse, and I explain everything that's happened and what we've done. And she says, "Thank you very much." And she takes Joe off. And I turn around to walk out, and there's a doctor by the front door, and the doctor's laughing, and he's looking at me, and I said, how are you doing, officer? I said, "It's absolutely fine. I see you brought Joe back." I said, "Yeah, I brought back. I've just given it to one of your nurses over there." "That's not a nurse, son. That's a patient." And I thought, well, she's doing a remarkably good impression of a nurse.
Really?
So,
Brilliant.
yeah, so sometimes not even the bright coppers get it right over.
Well, that's assuming you're bright, Neil.
But I think I got her back to the hospital. I wonder whether the hospital was the name of a local hostelry. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the weird and wonderful world of being a response officer.
But they love it. You talked about it being addictive, and I think people love it because it's never the same thing twice.
Yeah.
You are constantly, you don't have the detective's intro that never goes down and it's there 24/7. It's in the back of your mind. Each shift is a new shift. And response officers got very annoyed when they started. They were given crimes back, and you were going to be given low-level crimes that you had to investigate to try and reduce the load on the CID. And of course, they couldn't do it because they were answering more and more calls. And I'm always heartened to hear response officers say the thing that pisses them off more than anything else about the job that they do is the fact that they don't get to spend enough time with victims, so they can't deliver the kind of quality that a victim needs. When you hear response officers saying that and really meaning it, it hurts them. You kind of know, A, they're in the right profession with the right heart, in the right place, in the right time. But how sad there aren't enough of them because we're not giving them the opportunity.
And they're probably being called off to a job about a spider in the bathroom or something.
Well, exactly.
And it doesn't help, of course, Neil, when all these response officers are constantly getting filmed and being pumped out online. And we're going to be talking about that after the break. Neil, you must have seen it online. I mean, I know you're not on social media, but, you do have a phone.
I do.
You do.
I can use it.
And you do respond back to me at times. But listen, you see these videos, and they often go viral, of these quite young officers tackling a suspect, and the suspect seeming to have their way with them, just battering them away. And then this gets pumped out all over social media, and people rightly are saying this looks weak by the police. I wonder how much this plays into the, what we've just been talking about police officers just being sick of the job. They know that every single job they go to, they're probably going to get filmed, and it's probably going to be put online out of context. How much do you think that affects young response officers?
I think, put it like this: anyone who's joining now, you're gonna be somewhere between 18 and 25 if you're young and joining the police, which means you're going to have had. You're pretty much Gen Z, maybe just on the cusp. You're going to have had an entire lifetime growing up with social media, so you're used to this. You're used to your life being out there all of the time. In some ways, that should build a little bit of resilience because you're used to seeing yourself out there. You're probably posting yourself out there. In other ways, it doesn't, because you know the effect that can have when it goes viral. And of course, what's happening is a lot of people, and I've got family members and friends who send me clips of police officers doing things, saying, "What do you think of this?
Right.
This doesn't look good, does it?" To one family member, I've had to say, "Stop doing that. You're much brighter than that. You have to understand that this will not be the whole incident from start to finish. If it is a whole incident from start to finish, then that's not great. But I guarantee it isn't. There'll be lots more context. There'll be lots more of the officer's body-worn video. There'll be witnesses. You can't take it off literally a 15-second clip, which on its own looks appalling, but then that officer gets completely mullered in the press."
I don't know if you saw this as well. It was a few weeks ago. It was like a female Merseyside police officer. And again, this drunk arsehole basically was just getting right in her face, filming her, chatting shit. And then she just goes, stop filming. That's a bit noncy, isn't it? So she basically came back at him, and then he kicked off saying, "Oh, you can't say that." Do you know what? I quite like that from that officer. I know it was a bit, it's probably wouldn't have been approved by the press and communications department, but I think if someone's filming you and you're a cop on the street, especially in this day and age, they're putting the phone in your face. I don't blame those officers for giving them a bit of shit back. Do you?
Well, we know a few heads of comms department who probably would be on your side and would say, I mean, I was taught that you have to be authoritative when you're dealing with the public. When you talk about officers being sick of things, they're sick of being constantly confronted and constantly abused, and then reading about that with no balance for all the good work they do. Nobody's filming when they're getting thanked by victims.
Well, they probably are, and they're
solving
probably
crime.
deleting it straight after because it wouldn't go viral.
Possibly. So I can understand why all of this gets on top of them after a while. And it's very difficult. And we're talking about response here. And it's easy if you've had a career where you've been able to go to do different things. You've been able to have a rest from that kind of constant confrontation. If you haven't, can you imagine doing 30 or now, because of pension changes, 40 years, earlys, lates and nights, physical shifts that completely destroy your body and your fatigue destroys your mental health, and you're dealing with that confrontation all the time. And you're thinking, God, I'm going to be in my early 60s and I'm still going to be rolling around with and getting abuse from drunks like that.
Yeah, there's no way
I'm
you
not.
could do it.
I'm not sure most officers could do that. There's a reason why in the States and in Australia, police officers can draw their pensions at 20 years, because those countries have recognized the fact that it is a very stressful job that is incredibly difficult to do to a high standard when you're under constant scrutiny. And those camera phones out there, it is 24/7 scrutiny now.
Yeah, and listen, let's just wrap up this episode by going back to these hoax calls, these 999 calls, which are mainly just nonsense. We've heard. How do we solve this problem? So the Met and other forces have put out a campaign in recent times, putting out their messaging. Please stop doing this. It's draining the resources. It doesn't seem to be working, Neil. Is getting all authoritarian on this? Is that the answer? Nicking people for calling up and wasting time? Which obviously does happen when it's deliberate. But if it's not deliberate, just say someone calls and they say, I've got a spider in my bathroom. I'm going to put you on the spot here. They've got a spider in my bathroom, and they're on the phone for however long, and another call is missed, and this other call is about someone dying there and then. Should that person who called in about the spider, should they be nicked? Should they get a warning? What do you reckon?
Well, I think in one of the clips we've used for this episode, we hear a call handler saying precisely that. This is for life and death. This is an emergency. This isn't just because you've got a problem you can't solve. And I think the trouble is the world's full of idiots. The world's full of petty people. As one great chief superintendent once said to me, the trouble with petty people is they report petty things. Yeah. And the world is obviously also full of addicts and people with serious mental health problems. They tend to be the routine cause of repeat calls to the police, which are, as you say, not necessarily intentional, particularly for people who are ill, but nevertheless, they are massively distracting. Now, they need to be treated. And one of the things we used to do was every chief constable knows where their repeat calls are coming in from. They know the venue and they know the phone, which means they can identify the individual. Those individuals need to be treated. Anyone who's suffering from an illness, an addiction, or a mental health problem needs to be treated by another agency. Actually prosecuting somebody at the end of the day, I mean, it's a 6 month or a fine. It's a summary only offence. It's never going to get that far with most of these. So really, you've got to talk about a strong warning for people, and the control room staff are bravely doing that, knowing that they are being recorded and listened to. So, but I think most police officers, the idea of wasting court time on an offence of wasting police time is kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, no, listen, I totally agree. I was just being devil's advocate, trying to project.
You're very good at that. Someone said you were a journalist.
Hey,
they didn't know any of that.
Shots fired. All right, let's leave it there, Neil. Thanks for listening to The Crime Agents. Make sure you subscribe to us on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And remember, you can watch all of our main episodes on YouTube as well. Just search The Crime Agents and subscribe to our channel.
And we'll be back with another episode next week. So goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.